Most people who watch Matt's off-road recovery think they know Katelynn. They see the smile, the confidence, the way she handles herself on jobs that most people would run from. She fits right in, and for a while, that's exactly what a lot of fans assumed. Just a girl who found herself on a popular YouTube channel and got lucky. But then came the interview, the one where she actually talked, the one where she laid out exactly who she was before any of this, and what she'd already done before most people her age had figured out what they even wanted to do with their lives. After that conversation, the comment sections changed, the way fans talked about her changed. And whether Matt realized it or not, the entire energy of the channel changed with it. This is the story of how a teenage girl from a small town in southern Utah became one of the most talked about faces in off-road YouTube, and why what she revealed shifted everything. Hurricane, Utah is not a place most people outside of the off-road world know by name. It sits in Washington County, tucked in near the base of Zion National Park, surrounded by red rock and desert terrain that's been a proving ground for off-road culture for decades. It's the kind of town where people grow up knowing how to handle a Jeep the way other kids learn to ride a bike. And it's exactly the kind of place that produces someone like Katelynn born. She was born into it. Her dad, Kevin, had been part of the rock crawling world for over 20 years before Katelynn was old enough to be a passenger. The sport requires two people, a driver and a spotter. And for years, Kevin struggled to find a consistent partner he could trust. Eventually, he stopped looking outside his own house. He put his daughter behind the wheel. She was 11 years old. That detail alone tells you something. Most adults who try rock crawling for the first time are terrified. It's not a casual hobby. You're driving a modified Jeep through courses laid out with cones and gates, navigating boulders and drops, with a 10-minute clock running and your spotter running alongside the vehicle, calling out every move. One wrong turn and you're rolling. The margin for error is almost nothing. Katelynn was 11 and she grasped it faster than Kevin expected. Faster, honestly, than he had any right to expect. Within 2 years, she wasn't just practicing, she was competing. By the time Katelynn was 14, she was showing up to W-Rock events, competitive rock crawling circuits that draw serious drivers from all over the country, and lining up against full-grown adults. Not in a junior class, not in a beginner bracket, against experienced competitors who'd been doing this for years. And she was winning. In her last 6 competitions at that age, she finished first in 4 of them, second in the other 2. Kevin described standing on the podium and tearing up because he couldn't believe what he was watching. That's not a proud parent exaggerating. The results were documented. She was a 14-year-old from Hurricane, Utah, finishing ahead of adults who had been competing in this sport for longer than she'd been alive. When she was asked once what rock crawling meant to her, she didn't pause to think about it. She just said, "It fills my soul." 3 words, no elaboration needed. The sport was expensive though, and that's where a lot of young competitors hit a wall. Equipment, entry fees, travel, it adds up fast. Kevin sat her down at the end of one season and told her straight. If she wanted to keep going, she was going to have to bring in sponsors because they couldn't keep funding it the way they had been. Most teenagers in that situation would nod and quietly give up on the idea. Katelynn picked up the phone. She made calls, she sent emails, she put together a pitch and went after it. By the time she was 16, her sponsor list looked like something you'd see on a professional competitor's rig. Warren Industries, Maxxis Tires, Yukon Gear and Axle, Raceline Wheels, Ori Struts, Adams Drive Shafts, Summit Machine, Artec Industries, Goat Built, and more. That is not a beginner's sponsor sheet. That's a list that serious adult racers spend years trying to build. She was also named Miss Hurricane during this period, a title that added another layer to who she was outside of competition. A young woman who was simultaneously a pageant title holder and one of the most competitive rock crawlers in her circuit, a combination that nobody saw coming and everybody remembered. In 2022, Katelynn and Kevin traveled to Farmington, New Mexico for the W-Rock Grand Nationals. The Grand Nationals is the championship-level event for the series, the one that counts most, the one that draws the best drivers, the one you prepare for all year. She tied for first place. A year later, 2023, she leveled up again. She moved out of the sportsman class, which is the competitive but more accessible tier, and stepped into the Pro Mod series. That's the top tier of W-Rock competition. The adults who compete there are the best in the country at what they do. Katelynn went in at 16 and finished ranked 2nd in the Pro Mod class at the Grand Nationals, 2nd in the country, in the top division. As a teenager, that's the background she was carrying when she walked into Matt Wetzel's world. Matt Wetzel had been crossing paths with Kevin and Katelynn at rock crawling events for a while before anything came of it. That community is tight-knit. The same faces show up to the same circuits, the same competitions, and you start to get a real sense of who people are over time. Matt didn't just see a kid who was good at driving a Jeep. He watched her under pressure. He saw how she communicated with her spotter, how she handled mistakes during a run, how she carried herself after a tough course. He saw something beyond technical skill. Matt's off-road recovery was already pulling serious numbers on YouTube by the time he extended an invitation to Katelynn. The channel had built its audience on real recovery work out of southern Utah, actual jobs, actual stuck vehicles, actual stakes. It wasn't staged. The crew was a mix of personalities that the fanbase had grown deeply attached to, and adding anyone new was always a risk. The audience notices, they have opinions. But Matt made the call. Katelynn came on board as a content creator, and part of how it was introduced was straightforward. Matt would teach her the recovery side of the operation from the ground up. She was coming in with off-road credentials that were legitimately impressive, but vehicle recovery is a different world than competitive rock crawling. Different tools, different techniques, different risks. She was starting fresh in some ways, and she was honest about that from the beginning. That honesty is what made the interview hit the way it did. When Katelynn sat down on camera and actually talked, not just did her job on a recovery, but talked about where she came from and what she'd been doing before more, the comment section lit up. Because the version of Katelynn most fans had started to form in their heads didn't match the reality at all. She wasn't there because she looked the part or because someone thought it would be good for the channel's demographics. She was there because she had been competing against adults in one of the most demanding off-road disciplines in the country since she was 13, had built a professional-level sponsor package herself, had tied for a national championship, and had stepped into the pro mod circuit while still in her teens. The fans who assumed she was a personality pick, that she was there to be the face of something and not really do the work, had to reckon with that. And to be fair, most of them did. The comments shifted from skepticism to something closer to genuine respect, and fast. What she described on camera, the early mornings, the rolled Jeeps, the tight courses where you have 10 minutes to make decisions that most people would need an hour for, the process of cold calling sponsors as a teenager because you needed to fund your own competitive career, none of it sounded like a YouTube personality's backstory. It sounded like someone who had been building a real thing in a niche world long before cameras were pointed at her. And that's when people started watching her differently. The off-road recovery world on YouTube is not particularly diverse when it comes to gender. That's not an attack on anyone, it's just a fact about the landscape. The dominant voices have always been men, the crews are almost entirely male, and the default assumption when you see a woman appear in that space is that she's there in a supporting role, a sidekick, someone to balance the dynamic, not someone to drive the technical conversation. Katelynn blew that assumption up completely. Not by making a point of it, not by doing anything performative, just by being exactly who she was. She had more documented competitive experience in legitimate off-road competition than most people twice her age. She had national-level results. She had sponsors who believed in her enough to write checks. And now she was on one of the biggest recovery channels in the country, learning a new trade from scratch with the same methodical approach she'd applied to everything else. For a wave of female viewers who had been watching MOR for years but never quite felt like the channel was made for them, that changed the math. The comments from women who said they'd started getting their daughters into off-road culture specifically after watching Katelynn, that's not a small thing. That kind of ripple doesn't happen from a casting decision. It happens when someone shows up and is genuinely, undeniably the real thing. What changed at MOR after that interview became a thing people pointed to was harder to quantify but easy to feel. Her episodes started pulling the kind of retention numbers that content creators obsess over. The audience didn't drop off. They stayed, they commented, they came back. Some of that is just Katelynn's personality. She's naturally engaging on camera in a way that can't be manufactured. But a significant part of it was credibility. The fan base knew her story by that point. When she was on a job, they weren't just watching a personality navigate a recovery. They were watching someone with documented off-road instincts figure out a new application of those instincts in real time. That's compelling television. It's compelling for the same reason any skilled person learning something new is compelling. You can see the wheels turning. Matt's investment in her growth followed the pattern that MOR fans recognized from other crew members who had earned their place. The channel has a history of backing the people who show up, work hard, and prove it over time. Katelynn fit that pattern. She wasn't the exception to how MOR does things. She was exactly the kind of person that culture was built to reward. Here's the thing about Katelynn Bourne that the interview made impossible to ignore. She was never a YouTube story first. She was an off-road story first, a genuine one, with competition results and sponsor contracts and podium finishes to back it up. YouTube was just the bigger stage. That distinction matters more than most people think. The off-road YouTube world is full of personalities who are good at being watchable. What it doesn't have many of is people who were already credentialed competitors before they became content. Katelynn was both, and the interview is the moment that line got drawn clearly. She was 16, competing at the national level in the Pro Mod class, running a sponsor-funded operation she had built herself, representing her hometown, and carrying herself with the kind of composure that usually takes people decades to develop. Then she showed up to Matt's off-road recovery and started learning something new from the ground up because she was genuinely curious about it and knew she didn't know it yet. That willingness to be a beginner in public, after everything she'd already proven, might be the most underrated part of her story. Most people with a resume like hers would have come in trying to prove they already knew everything. Katelynn came in ready to learn, and it showed. The interview didn't make her famous. The work did that, but the interview made people stop and understand why they were watching in the first place. There's a version of this story where Katelynn Bourne becomes just another face that cycled through a popular channel. That version doesn't exist. She's still there, still working, still drawing viewers who stick around because what they're watching is the real thing. And for a space that can smell a fake from a mile away, that's everything.